The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
All right, maybe you think you have a reason to kvetch, right? This is the Commanders. They've got Magic Johnson as part of their group. They hired a search committee, which includes former general manager of the Golden State Warriors, guy who won a bunch of rings, Bob Myers. They've got Rick Spielman, former general manager of the Minnesota Vikings. They've already got their general manager in place, Adam Peters. He was hired right away, swiftly. And they got Dan Quinn? Really? I'm not as down on it as some people are. I know it's not a sexy hire. And I know, there's no dancing in the streets over a coach who just got his doors blown off by the Green Bay Packers at home in the playoffs and who got fired at 0-5 by the Atlanta Falcons. I understand that. And while there was, great hope that Ben Johnson was going to wind up here, even though 6 months ago nobody knew who the hell Ben Johnson was. They didn't get him. God, he went back to Detroit. He must really think this organization stinks. Maybe so. I don't know. But he had other offers, apparently. Mike McDonald, he's right up the road in Baltimore, and reports were that even as he was flying to Seattle to take that job, that Josh Harris called him one last time. You sure? You sure you don't want to? You sure you got the right Washington here? Washington State, not Washington D.C.? Okay, fine. Yeah, I understand all that. But we have to realize a few things here. Number one, Dan Snyder's not here. Number two, Dan Snyder's not here. So this is a new regime. And the way this was done was the way it's supposed to be done. You hire a general manager. You hire somebody. Now, he's in it for the first time. We don't know how well Adam Peters is going to do. He was not the head guy in San Francisco, and now he moves up to the top job, so we don't know how good he's going to be. And Dan Quinn, while many look at this as Ron Rivera too, you have to realize he's here strictly to coach. That's it. He's not here to be the coach-centric that Rivera was. And that was doomed from the start, mainly because it was a Dan Snyder team. And you also have to remember this. When he took the job, the landscape was a lot different than what he found just a few months later. When he was hired, January 2nd of 2020, when Snyder wished everybody a happy Thanksgiving, there had not yet been the reporting from the Washington Post about the sexual harassment and all the horrible things that were going on in the organization under Dan Snyder. The name issue seemed to be dormant at that point, and then we later find out that Snyder tried to cheat his partners out of dividends, and they turned on him and said, okay, we're going to take our naming rights off the stadium. We're going to drop our sponsorships unless you change the name. So he was backed into the corner to do that. So they became the Washington football team for a while. And we also had COVID, which, was a difficult situation, not just for this team, but for every team, but especially for this team with a new coach coming in where he couldn't really even meet his players. And then that coach got cancer. So there were a lot of things that were different along the way. I'm not saying that Ron Rivera did a fabulous job, but the job he took was too big from the beginning and then got much bigger because of circumstances, some of it beyond his control. He made some bad decisions. There's no question about it. And he proved that he's probably not head coach material, and I don't think he'll get another shot now at 61. And irony of ironies, he's reportedly in line to talk to the Dallas Cowboys about becoming their defensive coordinator to replace Dan Quinn. But I'm not going to get all upset about this. I think that you have to look at the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is this is becoming now a real organization. It has been a farce for 20 years. And, if you look at where they are and where they want to be, that's still a big gap. And two major factors, which, may not seem to play into it as much as you might think, but it's a big deal to players. The facility, the practice facility in Ashburn is way outdated. Snyder didn't spend any money there. They've upgraded some things, but just a few years ago, you had players coming in from even medium-sized schools. I'm not talking about Michigan and Ohio State and Clemson and Alabama, but they were coming in from just, run-of-the-mill schools and looking at the weight room and saying, ours at college was so much better than this. And those things are important to players, not just in attracting free agents, but the overall feel that they have for the organization. The constant churn and burn that they've had with various people, not just on the football side, but on the business side, creating chaos. And I'm really surprised that Jason Wright is still on the job. One blunder after another, but he's still there, and the players look at that as well. And then, the stadium. It's the worst stadium in the NFL right now. Everybody knows that. So all those things added up. And in hiring a guy who's in his 50s, in Dan Quinn, maybe he's not going to be the coach here in 10 years. Maybe he's not going to be the coach here in 5 years. But I think if you look at the most important thing in this organization, it's building the roster. And that's what Adam Peters is going to do. Ron Rivera, in charge of that, as well as running the football team, as well as taking the body blows for all the nonsense that was going on with Dan Snyder, that is all gone. And he could not handle all of that. He was not a good CEO and was biting off really more than anyone could chew. And so now you have just Dan Quinn as the head football coach. That's the thing. Now, you get to offensive coordinator. Offensive coordinator is going to be a big hire. Eric Bieniemy is still under contract. So theoretically, Dan Quinn could walk in the building. He could sit down with Eric Bieniemy, and I'm sure that's going to be part of the whole process, that he was told that at least he has to talk to him about staying because he does have a contract for next year. And if Bieniemy wants to leave, he's really going to have to get permission to do so, because the way things are set up in the NFL, if you make a lateral move, the team has to allow you to do it unless they fire you. And Quinn may say, yeah, well, he's not in my plan, so just let him go and pay him off, and he'll go someplace else. Maybe he'll go back to Kansas City. Who knows? He was very much missed there apparently during the season, so he could go back there. But he will, I'm sure, get an interview. But the more likelihood is it's going to be somebody who's connected to Dan Quinn, probably through the Shanahan tree. And with Kyle Shanahan, Dan Quinn had his biggest success. Kyle Shanahan, as you probably know, was the offensive coordinator when the Atlanta Falcons went to the Super Bowl after the 2016 season. And you can criticize Kyle Shanahan for throwing the football when he should have run the ball and had a chance to kill more of the clock, and they wound up losing in overtime to the Patriots. But he also put together a very good team. Now, you also have to realize this, and this is another big part of the picture, is quarterback. And that Falcon team had Matt Ryan with still tread on the tires. And I've even read some, I don't necessarily buy it, but I've read that Matt Ryan may be a Hall of Fame candidate. He may be that good if you look at his numbers as a quarterback. But he was a franchise guy, a franchise quarterback, a veteran franchise quarterback, and they had that with Kyle Shanahan. But as Barry Zerluga points out in the Post today, the two of them together were much better than apart. He says Quinn's record, including the playoffs with Kyle Shanahan as his offensive coordinator, 21-14. Quinn's record, including the playoffs without Shanahan calling the plays and designing the schemes, 25-30. 21-14 with, 25-30 without. So the offensive coordinator is going to be a big hire for them. It would seem that the logical choice would be Clint Kubiak, who's the passing game coordinator for the San Francisco 49ers, has worked under Kyle Shanahan. He's got a relationship with Quinn. He knows what he's getting. He knows how Kyle runs his offense. He knows what Kubiak has picked up. And by the way, Kubiak is the son of Gary Kubiak, a former head coach in the NFL, former longtime offensive coordinator, and a backup quarterback for a whole bunch of years with the Denver Broncos to John Elway. So there's bloodlines there, and there's family. The other name that is surfacing, and I just have a hard time getting my head around this, is Chip Kelly. Chip Kelly has been the head coach with UCLA, and his record there is not very good. He's 35-34, though 25-13 over the last 3 years, so they picked up a little bit. But he's, as you know, been a head coach in the NFL and actually got off to a good start with the Philadelphia Eagles. They had a 26-21 record in his 3 years, including the NFC East title in 2013. He was fired by the Eagles, went to the 49ers for 1 year, 2016, and his record was 2-14. So you could look at it two ways. The Chip Kelly offense, which launched at Oregon. I mean, he was tremendous there. He was 46-7 in his 4 years at Oregon, which got him to the NFL. You could say that his offense maybe isn't as translatable, let's say, to the NFL. Or you could also say, hey, as a head coach, he was just okay. He did get a team to the NFC Championship, to the East title, NFC East title, so he was able to do that. But maybe as a head coach in the NFL, he's not good, and maybe he could be a good offensive coordinator. The problem I have with him is the offense is high speed. It's a lot of a lot of passing, which is part of the game today. But you're going to have a lot of 3 and outs the way it's run, and a defensive coach doesn't usually like that. A defensive coach wants his defense to be resting, and so look at the classic example of Bill Parcells, who had a ground and pound attack on offense to eat up the clock, and then his defense, led by Lawrence Taylor and others, would take care of things. I've talked about this before. I was at a game against the Miami Dolphins where Dan Marino had a really bad day, threw a bunch of incompletions and interceptions, and it was a 2-hour and 20-minute game because they just took all the air out of the ball. And that's what defensive guys usually like. So the Chip Kelly, no huddle, boom, 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 I'm not so sure that that's a good fit with what he wants to do. So that's just my layman's take on this. And I just look at it and say, I'm really not sure about that. This is Adam Schefter yesterday, maybe putting some ruffled feelings to rest about, they had to settle for Dan Quinn, huh? Well, here's what Schefter's view of this is. And remember, Schefter was saying earlier this week, hey, not so fast on Ben Johnson going to Washington, and not so fast on Dan Quinn going to Seattle. A lot of people thought that was going to happen. He said it's possible neither will. And in fact, neither did. Quinn winds up here. Johnson goes back to Detroit, and we move forward. Here's Schefter yesterday on ESPN on the Quinn hire.
First and foremost, they had the GM that they wanted. They got the guy that they wanted right away in Adam Peters, and they hired him out of the box. That was something that was important to them, and they got that done. And I think that they were of the mind that in a perfect world, they weren't going to be pairing a first-time GM with a first-time head coach. And so Dan Quinn checks the boxes there in that regard. The other thing is that when these organizations are going through this hiring process, they make a lot of calls and they get a lot of calls from a lot of different people. Endorsing candidates, recommending guys. You got to get to know this guy. I'm telling you about this guy, vouching for this guy. I know that the Commanders felt like they got more calls and more texts unsolicited about Dan Quinn with positive messages from people than they got from any other candidate. And that's just the way that it kind of went. Now, that's not why he got the job, but it certainly was comforting and reassuring that they felt like they were getting a guy that is high energy, that's upbeat, that's positive. It probably doesn't hurt that you're weakening the team in the division, although I don't really believe that to be a driving force and a primary factor in why they hired Dan Quinn. They hired Dan Quinn because they believe in him as a leader. They believe in him as a man. They believe that other people are spot on in what they say about Dan Quinn, who had been a finalist for other head coaching jobs, and the board just didn't fall his way in recent years. But they feel like they've got a whole energetic, upbeat, positive guy stepping in to Washington to help try to lead that team into the future.
Yeah, and given the chaos that's gone on here before, don't you kind of want somebody to calm things down like that? Somebody who can step in here and create positive vibes. Not that Rivera didn't try and in some ways did, but that's what you want. I'll just read you this. I texted my nephew yesterday. My nephew's on the training staff with the Atlanta Falcons. So he came on, I guess, the year after they won the Super Bowl, so he would have overlapped Quinn for one season, and then the 5 games that he got fired, that season that he was fired, which would have been 2018, I guess. And he said, this is my nephew, the text I got back from him about Quinn. He said, would follow him into war with a fork and a knife. Haven't seen players play for a coach as passionately as they do for him. Cares deeply about the success of his guys. Preaches that the way we do things is the way we always do everything, and lives it. First in the building, last to leave, leads by example, and he says doesn't have a bad thing to say about it. The other really interesting nugget that I saw about Dan Quinn, and that was from Nikki Jabala's story in the Post today, and Logan Paulson, who played here as a tight end for a number of years, and then finished his career bouncing around with a few teams, but 10 years playing in the NFL, and now a part of the Commanders broadcast team. He says about the culture that he was able to build. We're taking it seriously, but we can enjoy each other and enjoy each other's time. It all comes from him and his personality. And this, I've never heard anything like this before. After Quinn was fired in Atlanta, he called Paulson to get his input on what he could have done better as a head coach. And Paulson was asked, has that ever happened to you before? He said, no, never. I've never heard of that happening with anybody. Maybe it does, but that tells you something, too, that he's bound to determine. And one other thing, not that I'm on the payroll here for Dan Quinn, but he went to Salisbury. And my experience in talking to people at the highest level of sports is that it's very, very difficult to rise to a head coaching job in anything like Division I basketball. If you didn't play it, it's tough to get there. Not that guys don't do it, but it's tough to get there. If you did not play high-level college football, it's hard to get to become a head coach, because the natural progression is you stop playing, you become a graduate assistant, you move up the chain. Played at Salisbury, Division III, and was able to, I guess through the force of his work and his personality, rise to the level of becoming a head coach in the NFL. That's impressive to me. That says something. Now, you might say, well, he didn't, wasn't a very good player and doesn't understand all the things. Well, okay, maybe so. But everything you hear from Schefter, I read you the text from my nephew, he's liked. He's people follow him. He raises their level, and that's an important thing. And yes, it was a disaster what happened to them against the Green Bay Packers. But you also have to look at what he did in his 3 years when he was the defensive coordinator of the Cowboys. He took one of the worst defenses in the league and raised it up to a higher level. Now, Micah Parsons and others being added to it didn't hurt for sure, but you got to coach it up, and it looks like he's done that. So, let's pump the brakes a little bit. We went from the absolute worst circumstance in sports with a Dan Snyder-owned team to now a team that's not owned by Dan Snyder, has a general manager, which he should have had and really never had, and a head coach who's had some success. And we'll see if he can recapture that, or if not, they have to move on. But the most important thing for the next few years is to build the roster, and that's what Adam Peters is going to do. All right, coming up, more of these great interviews that have surfaced from Joe Buck. This one with Joe Theismann. Now, you may have heard some of the stories before, but he goes back to his youth growing up in New Jersey and how he got to where he got to, and talks about regrets that he had as well, even after winning the Super Bowl. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Probably the easiest thing to do in this business is an interview with Joe Theismann. He is the chattiest of the chattiest. Tony Kornheiser used to write that Joe would open his refrigerator and do 15 minutes in front of the light bulb. He was a gold for reporters who used to cover the team, and he's segued into a great broadcasting career and does a lot of motivational speaking and stuff like that. So getting more of these interviews that Joe Buck did, they're called Undeniable. You can find them on YouTube. And I went through the Joe Theismann one from, I guess, 2016, 17. And, you know his background. He grew up in New Jersey. Drew Pearson was a high school teammate. He went to Notre Dame and did not go to the NFL even after he was drafted by the Dolphins coming out of Notre Dame. They took him in the 4th round. He went to play in Canada for 3 years. Came here, expected to play right away for the Redskins. Had to sit for essentially 3 years behind Billy Kilmer and Sonny Jurgensen before he became the starting quarterback, and then, of course, led them to their first Super Bowl championship. But we start coming out of high school where he's quarterbacked an undefeated team, and he's got offers to play college football, and this is how he wound up at Notre Dame, as he tells Joe Buck.
So you're barely over 150 as a senior on this undefeated team in South River.
That's because I had a great receiver in Drew Pearson.
Yeah.
Drew was my wide receiver in high school.
For those NFL fans, Drew Pearson, the Cowboy great, was your receiver. He was 2 years younger than you.
2 years younger. When I left, he became the quarterback.
Now, all of a sudden, Notre Dame drops out of the sky. I know you wanted to go to Duke. The grades weren't good enough.
Right. I visited 5 schools. I limited down to 5 just to try and make things a little more sane in the determination of where I wanted to go. Penn State, Notre Dame, UNC, Wake, and NC State. Those 5 schools. Visited all of them.
But as a 5'11", 152-pound quarterback?
Size means nothing. It depends on your attitude going forward. I mean, to me, I wasn't too small. When I grew up, going back a little bit when I was in high school, when I was 13, I played with guys that were 15 and 16. When I was 15, I played with guys that were 17 and 18. I was always sort of playing up a level. Whether it was the skills that I had, the athletic ability I had, I could hold my own with them. And so to me, there wasn't really a mountain that was too high that was presented in front of me that I couldn't quite climb. I felt I never feared the top of the mountain. I never thought I couldn't get there.
You go to Notre Dame, and there was a headline somewhere that said basically Theismann's going to get his
I believe it was
off.
a Newark, New Jersey newspaper that said Theismann will get killed at Notre Dame. And if there's one thing about me that I think a lot of people realize, if you want me to do something, tell me I can't. Go ahead and challenge me. You can call it pride. You can call it spite. I don't care what you call it. Inside of me, if someone says, I don't believe you can get that done, I will do everything I can to get it done. I was one of 13 quarterbacks because back in '67, what Notre Dame would do is they would sign all these great quarterbacks because they were athletes. Some would become defensive backs, some would become wide receivers, some would become linebackers, some would become
athletes,
tight ends.
they were smart.
I was so small. Yeah, they were bright. Some of us weren't as bright. And then now skinny again. I mean, there are women that would kill for a waist like that.
So one
they
of
really,
13.
But they couldn't do anything with me. That was the thing. I was too small. This is where my size really benefited me. I was too small to become a running back or a wide receiver or a defensive back or anything else. So I remained as the quarterback. And I was the freshman quarterback. But I did something that I look back and say, this is really one of the most intelligent things I've ever done. Because there were 13 other quarterbacks, I decided to go to Notre Dame 1 week early. And I met with the coaches, and I figured out where to stand in the huddle. And I learned some of the plays, and I learned the cadence, because we all know, whether you're in business or sports, coaches or executives, they like meetings to run smooth. Coaches like practices to run smooth. They don't want to be correcting you. Where do you stand? No, you didn't get the play out. I invested 1 week of my life going into Notre Dame early, sitting with the coaches. So when everybody else got there, I created the #1 position just by showing up early. I created myself an opportunity. Now, could I keep it? Who knew? Was I good enough to be able to play the position and stay there? I didn't know. I thought I was. But at least I was given the chance, because I went in 1 week early. And today I describe it in a book I'm writing, it's a competitive edge. How do you create a competitive edge for yourself? For me, it was an investment of 1 week in time where I got to move to the head of the line. And then it was up to me to be able to seize the opportunity and keep it if I could.
Which happened your sophomore year. Hanratty, right. Terry Hanratty gets hurt, and you step in.
Terry went down, I believe it was for Pittsburgh game. He went down late on a Friday. Errol walked over and said, "You're in." And that was
what's that like?
That right there, that moment right there is one of the most scary moments in your life. But you can't let them know you're scared. So you get in that huddle, you kneel down, and you look up, and they have to believe the next words that are coming out of your mouth. All right, guys, look, I know Terry's not here, but we can get it done. Let's go. Frank, all right, let's go. Now, I don't know whether I'm talking to them or I'm talking to me, but I'm trying to convince both of us that we can go get this done. And then, fortunately, you have something positive happen, and then it starts to build, and now all of a sudden, you're the quarterback of the University of Notre Dame.
Which he was for 3 years. And, excuse me, you've probably heard that his name was Theismann, and it became Theismann because it rhymed with Heisman. Here's the full story of that. Here's how Joe Theismann became Joe Theismann.
So your senior year is 1970.
Right.
You're playing great. You're in the Heisman Trophy conversation.
Yeah.
And tell us about the switch, because up till that year, everybody knew you as Joey Theismann.
That's correct. I was a Theismann for 20 years of my life. And Roger Valdesari, who was our public relations director at the University of Notre Dame, the year before my junior year, had a really good junior year as well. We did as a football team, and I particularly did as well. And so a reporter, I guess, from Chicago was standing on the sidelines watching spring practice. And he walked up and just mentioned to Roger, he says, hey, isn't that Joe Theismann like in Heisman out there? And it stuck with him. He never said a word to me. All through spring, at the beginning of my senior year, he calls me in the office. He says, how do you pronounce your last name? I said, it's Theismann. He said, no, it's not. It's Theismann. I said, no, it's not. It's Theismann. He said, Joe, I want to tell you something. There's a trophy out there called the Heisman Trophy. He goes, the best college football player in the country. We think you have a chance to win that trophy, but we're not just going to count on your athletic ability, nor are we going to count on the reputation of the University of Notre Dame. We think just by changing the pronunciation of your last name from Theismann to Theismann to rhyme with Heisman, we can get you that trophy. And that's how my name was changed.
Is it at all insulting, or does it bother your family?
No, because I needed confirmation. So I called my grandmother, who was the matriarch of the family. I called my grandmother and I said, Granny, I got a question for you. She says, go ahead, what you got? I said, Graham, they want to change the pronunciation of our last name from Theismann to Theismann. How do you feel about it? She says, well, you know, the correct pronunciation is actually Theismann. So that seems to be a bit closer. I'm okay with it. And so I was fine with it. It was because my grandmother had blessed the changing of the name that it didn't bother me. And so it really didn't insult the family at all. And that's the way that's the way it's been ever since.
Yeah, and now it didn't lead to the Heisman Trophy. Jim Plunkett won that. Theismann finished second in the voting. And coming out of Notre Dame, because of the size, teams were hesitant, but the Miami Dolphins took him in the 4th round. And conventional thinking might say, well, there's Bob Greasy there. He knew he couldn't play, so he hopped off to Canada. Wasn't exactly that. He explained it by saying that he had tried to work out a contract with the Dolphins and wanted his signing bonus to be guaranteed, but they weren't willing to do that because of the Vietnam War. And there was the possibility that Theismann could get drafted and they wouldn't have him available for training camp and felt like they shouldn't pay him. So he wanted that money guaranteed, and they weren't going to do it. Don Shula was both the coach and the general manager, wouldn't do it, and he went off and played for the Toronto Argonauts for 3 years, and he said Shula always hated him because of that. But finally, after playing 3 years there, George Allen wants him as a quarterback, and even though he was a 4th rounder with the Dolphins, Allen gives up a 1st rounder to bring him to Washington. And here's how that started.
George Allen trades a number 1 pick for me.
Because the Dolphins own your rights.
They own my rights to come back. But they'd won 3 championships without me. So, do we really need Joe Theismann now? And so I wind up going, and George trades a number 1 pick to the Dolphins.
And he was a hell of a salesman, right?
Unbelievable. And he was a lefty, and he'd always lick his thumb. He'd lick his thumb, and I sat with him, and he said, you know, I can go get this guy, I can go get this guy and this guy, but I want you. I want you, because I think you can help us. Now, Billy Kilmer's there. Billy's 10 years older than I am. Sonny's 11, 12 years
40.
older than I am. Oh, yeah, they're older guys. I'm thinking, it's a good opportunity to be able to go. So these were the leaders of the football team, and I challenged that particular position. And I didn't do it in a very diplomatic way. I certainly look back and probably could have been a little bit different, but I am who I am. I make no apologies for it.
So you show up.
I show up, but I don't just show up.
No.
First thing I say is, I didn't come here to sit. I came here to play. Well, that upset Billy and Sonny just a little bit. Then the next thing I do is I wind up doing a television show on ABC TV there. And so I'm critiquing the games now. I have a 5-minute segment, so I'm critiquing them.
As, in essence, the third string quarterback, you have a TV segment.
Absolutely, got my own little segment. But wait, I'm not done yet. I write a book now on quarterbacking. Having never played quarterback in the National Football League, I'm writing a book modeled on the book I wrote in the Canadian Football League called Quarterbacking. I think that might have been the straw that broke the camel's back. And so what happened, and this is the story that I understand, don't know it to be true, but myths sometimes a lot more fun. So Billy and Sonny got together at a watering hole one night and decided that it didn't matter to them anymore which one of them played, as long as it wasn't me.
That's basically true. But here's the story that I got from Billy Kilmer himself. 1974, which was Theismann's first year in the NFL, there was a veteran strike. And all the veterans walked out, including Sonny Jurgensen and Billy Kilmer. But Theismann, even though he had been out of college for 3 years and had played professionally in Canada, was technically a rookie in the NFL. And so he stayed, and he was quarterbacking a team made up of free agents and draft picks, and they went ahead with the exhibition season. And he played very well in a exhibition game, and the story was in the Post the next day with a quote from Theismann, saying, I maybe am going to keep those two old men on the bench, meaning Sonny and Billy. Billy says he called Sonny, and he said, did you read the story in the Post today? Did you see what Theismann said? They still call him Theismann to this day. They didn't like him at all. And they said, oh, really? Well, we'll see about that. And that's when they came up with, doesn't matter which one of us plays, as long as he didn't. And Theismann wound up returning punts in 74 and in 75. And then finally, by 1978, the job was his. And he's the quarterback when Joe Gibbs comes in 1981. And as we all know, it got off to a terrible start. 0-5, Theismann the quarterback, Gibbs the coach. And that's when this pivotal move by Theismann happened. He showed up at Gibbs' house. Here's the guts of the Theismann Redskins story as we continue with the interview with Joe Buck.
You know, you're 0-5. They're going to get rid of somebody. Me, not him. He's new, so he's probably going to stay.
He's not the guy that brought you there. He's not invested in Joe Theismann.
I'm not his, so what's the attachment? So I knock on the door, and he opens the door, and I guarantee you, he was the most shocked human being in the world. And I said, Coach, we need to talk. He said, come on, we'll sit down. And I said, Joe, look, I just don't feel like we're on the same page as far as the things we're doing. And he said, Joe, look, you have television shows, radio shows, restaurants. You have all these business entities. He said, I need somebody who is 100% committed to be the quarterback of my football team. I said, Joe, I'll do this. I'll get rid of everything. If you want me to, I'll just divest myself from everything.
Did you mean that?
I did. I wanted it. And I said, I'll do whatever I need to prove to you that I can be your quarterback. But you got to give me a chance, too. I had a goal to win a world championship. And from that day forward, that next game, we went 8-3.
You finished the year 8-8.
Right, yeah.
But it's starting to move.
We really started to create something in football that was unique, and that was the two tight end offense. And see, John Riggins, he's not a halfback. He's not a fullback. He's an R back. We called him a remaining back, a single back. But led the league in touchdowns.
Unbelievable talent.
Unbelievable.
Did you get along with Riggins?
Oh, yeah. John and I got along great. We had the group of guys that I played with in Washington, I've always described as a group of characters with character. If you lined up our football team and asked them to cross the street with the white lines that are drawn there, maybe 30% would stay inside the white lines. Other guys would wait for traffic to come and then try and dodge cars. Some of them would try and go over on wires. Some of them would hang from lights. I mean, it was a group of characters. My wide receivers were 5'9", Virgil Say, Alvin Garrett, Charlie
Smurfs.
Brown, the Smurfs. Our offensive line called themselves the Hogs. They had their own posters. I'm not a quarterback of a football team. I'm the ringmaster of a circus.
In 1982, during that strike-shortened season, you guys stormed into the playoffs with a great 8-1 record. How was postseason play different for you then?
As you go through the playoffs, each round of the playoffs, the speed of the game changes. It becomes more and more intense. Everybody gets faster and faster till you ultimately reach the game. And then the speed really goes. The game I remember was the NFC Championship game against the Dallas Cowboys. It was against our arch enemies. It was against a team that we don't like, never have liked them. It was played at our stadium. They had brought in some aluminum seats and ring the field with it. And the people were standing there pounding their feet at the end of that game. And literally, the ground beneath my feet was shaking.
Can you still hear that?
I can hear it, I can see it, I can feel it. These visuals of my injuries, all these different things. But my feet are shaking. That moment, I mean, the Redskin Nation was like unreal, unbelievable.
They did it. They went through the Dallas Cowboys, a team that you have to if you're going to represent the NFC.
Look, that'll run it out. In the meantime, the celebration goes on.
I mean, this was a great Dallas Cowboys team.
They always were.
So good.
They were the barometer of excellence by which I measured myself as a professional football player. But the guy that I really sort of modeled myself after as a professional was Roger, because of the things that he could do.
And similar stature.
And similar in stature. He'd gone away. He went to the military for 4 years. I went away to Canada for 3. So we both were away from the game for a little while.
In 1982, how ready were you for that Super Bowl? I mean, this is a long, I mean, talking about you. This is a long
road.
A long push
Yeah.
to get to the top.
It's like I said, if I didn't believe in myself, who was going to believe in me? Remember, I wasn't tough enough. I was too skinny. I was too small. I was all those things that people said I couldn't be. And I wasn't going to believe anybody. I was just going to try and believe in my own abilities to be able to do something.
You're the leader. It's your team.
My responsibility, my job. Who do we wind up playing in the Super Bowl? The Miami Dolphins.
Coached by?
Don Shula. So I guaranteed another 10 years for him not to like me.
Right, yeah.
I mean, it's just like pile it right on. But
okay, so for those of you who don't remember, this is Super Bowl 17.
Correct.
17-13 Miami, late third quarter. You're down back toward your own end zone.
We're on probably our own 10, 11.
Let's roll the tape.
Theismann batted in the air. Almost a touchdown for Kim Bocamper. Oh, my. Hey, Theismann cannot get the pass off. Rolls back against the grain. The batted ball there. Now watch Theismann go up and knock it out of the hands of Kim Bocamper.
Some have called that, and I think it works, the greatest incompletion in the history of the Super Bowl, which could have been backbreaking to your chances in that game. You're already trailing. It would have been a bigger
lost. There's no question in my mind we would never been able to overcome that deficit to drop back and throw against Bill Arnsparger and that great defense.
That's a tremendous heads-up play. I know it's just reaction.
The whole world went into slow motion. I turned to throw a quick hitch to the right. It was covered. And all of a sudden, the pressure came in. As I wheeled around, I wanted to hit Charlie, who'd gone in motion, Charlie Brown, and I threw it, and Kim went up. And as Kim goes up, the ball gets hit, and I managed to find it, and it feels like I've got cement. I'm running in cement. And in my mind, it's like, I've got to get there. And I knew I couldn't swat the ball. So I just leaped at the last minute to try and get my hand somewhere where I could strip it away from him. And I stripped it away. You could see how upset he was. And I'm sitting there in the end zone going, ooh, that was close.
Okay, so you're trailing at that point. Tell me about this play. There are different reports that I've read where you audibled to this play or you thought about audibling out of this play. It's a 4th and 1, right?
It's a 4th and 1 at a critical time in the game. And I never, ever, I will tell you, absolutely never thought about audibly out of this play.
Let's see who'll win this battle of strategy. Riggins. He's going to go all the way unless Blackwood can catch him, and he can't.
John gets in the end zone, and we get, we celebrate. I think that particular play sort of broke their spirit a little bit. That's when we sort of took control of the line of scrimmage with the size of that hole and what John was able to do.
Hail to the Redskins. Braves on the warpath. Victory for old D.C.
How does that make it? Looking
I get goosebumps watching it. I really do. I mean, It was an unbelievable opportunity to be able to experience something that is so hard to describe. Winning a Super Bowl, words are very difficult to come up with to describe the emotion of the moment. That tells you what the magnitude of that particular game is, and it changed my life. It gave me an opportunity to go on to be able to talk about being part of a champion, to be able to talk about the things that I believe are important when you want to be a champion. Why should you settle for average? Why should you just show up and do something? Why don't you try and be better than you think you can be?
Did winning the Super Bowl change the drive?
It changed me for the worse. It didn't make me better. I had a goal to win a world championship, and I did. That's why I have so much respect for Troy Aikman, for Terry Bradshaw, for Eli Manning, for Tom Brady, for men that have won multiple Super Bowls, because they didn't stop there. We were a much better football team in 1983 than we were in '82. We were a record-setting football team. We lost 2 games that year by 2 points. One to the Cowboys and one to the Packers, 48-47 on a Monday night. I mean, we were an unbelievable juggernaut. We wind up losing to the Raiders in Super Bowl 18. And I played a lousy football game. I got down to Tampa, and I was going to have a good time, and I was going to enjoy the Super Bowl experience. Unfortunately, I did. I just didn't focus enough on the task at hand, which was beating the Raiders. And I look back now, and that's why I admire people that once you think you've achieved that ultimate, what's the next step?
Yeah, and the next step wasn't that good for Joe Theismann. He got divorced shortly after that. They did get back to the playoffs in '84. Were upset by the Bears on I think it was New Year's Eve. And the following year, he broke his leg, and that was the end of his career. But to rise from an undersized quarterback in a small place in New Jersey to become the starting quarterback at Notre Dame and lead the Redskins to their first Super Bowl championship, quite a story, and nobody tells it better than Joe Theismann. All right, coming up in the next hour, Tony and Mike from PTI last night on the Quinn hire. Tony not enthusiastic about it. And also Patrick Mahomes Sr. was on our morning show yesterday and talked about the relationship with his son and maybe who's the better athlete. Might surprise you. Stay with us. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. At some point, there will be a big hoo-ha news conference, maybe in Ashburn, to introduce Dan Quinn as the new head coach of the Washington Commanders. I've been scrolling through Twitter, seeing if there's anything set as of now, but I think you're familiar with him, and you're familiar with his last act, which was not good. That was ugly, what happened against the Green Bay Packers. But, you know, it's like you're in school and your grade is not based on one single exam. You can flunk the midterm and still get maybe an A in the class if things go well. But also that he's been a head coach before and he's taken a team to a Super Bowl and seems to be beloved. You know, as I said in the last hour, my nephew is an assistant trainer with the Falcons and overlapped Quinn for a year and the 5 games before he got fired. And he said, you know, he's beloved there and the players play hard for him and he works hard. He's the first one in the facility and the last one to leave. And I really liked what Logan Paulson said to Nikki Javala in the Post that when and Paulson had played for the Falcons for a year, and he said after Dan Quinn got fired, Quinn called him and said, "What could I have done better as a head coach?" It's kind of cool. I mean, you know, maybe that's not what every coach does, and maybe, you know, that might, if you really want to get deep and psychological, maybe that's a little level of insecurity. I don't know. But he's getting another opportunity, and you might say, well, yeah, I mean, yeah, they had this plan set up where they were going to move quickly, and they did. They got Adam Peters hired right away. They were very impressive with him. What's the term that he used? He said something about doing it quickly but thoroughly. That's what it was. And then you figured, okay, you got Peters in place right away. They're going to get their guy. These are very successful people. With Josh Harris, he's owned teams. He's a billionaire. They were able to come up with the highest price ever for a franchise in $6 billion. They know what they're doing. They're going to get their guy. And they didn't get their guy. But they will probably tell you, and when this news conference takes place, they will probably tell you they got their guy. And they weren't out there saying who they wanted. They did leak a lot of stuff early on, but then, didn't say much about the search. And, Adam Schefter the other day, when it appeared that, now the Lions were out of it, as of Sunday, it's like, okay, full steam ahead. You go get Ben Johnson. Schefter said, well, not so fast. The thinking is Johnson goes to Washington and Quinn goes to Seattle. He says neither may happen. That's what happened. Quinn winds up here. Reception nationally and, for that matter, quasi-locally, with Tony Kornheiser living here and not leaving his basement. This was PTI yesterday. Wilbon was off, so Pablo Torre was in. And to say that this was a rousing reception for the news that Dan Quinn has become the head coach, would not be accurate. Here they are yesterday on PTI.
Pablo, do you like this hire by Washington?
I don't. And I get what Josh Harris, the new owner of the Washington Commanders, is trying to do, I suppose. He wants to find a forever coach, Tony. I guess that's the reason why you don't hire the greatest coach of all time. But to me, it's overthinking it. Like Dan Quinn, yes, good defensive coordinator. Cowboys, good with him. He's better with Kyle Shanahan, generally speaking, running the offense. But I would have hired Belichick. It's weird that I get to be the guy to take advantage of the market inefficiency that is, again, the greatest coach we've ever seen. I just feel like there's a little bit of the Brady thing happening, where for some reason it wasn't obvious that when that guy's a free agent, some team who wants to win that year might benefit from getting him in their building. Belichick, to me, despite all of the baggage, and there's the baggage we can talk about, he just feels like a layup to me for that specific desperate franchise.
Yeah, so that is my local team. And I've just spent the last 4 years watching a very dull team with Ron Rivera. Ron Rivera's record during that period of time, 26-40-1. Ron Rivera, defensive coach. Dan Quinn, defensive coach. Bill Belichick, Pete Carroll, Mike Vrabel, defensive coaches. I don't think they need a defensive coach coming out of the last 4 years. And I'm wondering if the new owners in Washington are not aware of this record. I mean, Dan Quinn's defense at Dallas, people praise it. They just gave up to essentially a rookie quarterback in a playoff game, 48 points. 48 points. Were the new owners in Washington in America when that happened? Were they in America when Dan Quinn's Atlanta team in the Super Bowl, that defense gave up 31 points in the second half and the overtime in the greatest comeback ever, and Dan Quinn's team did not win that game.
Yes.
To me, this is an uninspired hire. Dan Quinn's record, I believe, is something like 43-42 as a head coach. Mike Vrabel's is something like 54-45 as a head coach. I mean, no, I'm not enthusiastic. No, I'm not.
And I should say, look, in fairness, right, I'm not the first choice on today's show. I get it. This team seemed to want Ben Johnson, the OC for the Lions. They wanted offense. They couldn't get him.
Yes.
Ben Johnson said to them while they were en route to Detroit, actually, I'm going to stay.
Bobby Slowick as well. They interviewed Bobby Slowick as well. My point on this, Pablo, is that they should have hired an offensive guy, okay? They got to draft a quarterback. They've got to develop a quarterback. They don't need to know how to do the deep three zone. And they should have drafted one of those, not drafted, they should have signed one of them. Both those guys said no. They were staying where they were. The indication to me is they don't think the Washington job's a good job. They don't.
Okay. And there are a lot of reasons for that beyond what the structure is with the front office, with the first-time general manager and Adam Peters. The facilities stink. Mike McDonald goes to Seattle with the Paul Allen money funding one of the most beautiful facilities in the league, not to mention what is considered to be the best home field advantage in the NFL. You have a decrepit facility in Ashburn, and you have the worst stadium in the league. So those things are working against you there, and having a veteran guy come in who understands that, having coached there, for the last 3 years, every year as defensive coordinator of the Cowboys, and I believe the Falcons may have played them when he was the head coach there. So he gets it. He understands what he has to deal with. I am not as down on this as Tony is, and this may not be apples and oranges, but let me once again dip into the historical well here. You remember when Joe Gibbs, there he goes again, talking about Joe Gibbs. Yes, when Joe Gibbs came here in 1981, it was Joe Who, and things were a little bit different then. The hot coordinators weren't necessarily getting the jobs, but the structure was similar. Bobby Beathard had come in when Jack Pardee was the head coach, and Beathard didn't like Pardee. Pardee was a defensive guy. Beathard loved offense, even though he had played defense himself in college. And he wanted somebody who could spice things up and could have a more modern type of an offense. So he hired Joe Gibbs off Air Coryell, and they were lighting up the league. That was the Dan Fouts passing attack, and they were just putting up points by the bucketful. And you may not remember this, but during that 1980 season, before Gibbs came here, the terrible year, they finished 6-10 under Pardee. A year after contending and should have been able to get into the playoffs, but lost that heartbreaking game in Dallas where Roger Staubach pulled off his last big comeback. They went into that year, and Riggins held out, didn't play that year, and the bottom fell out. But late in that season, when they were already out of it, the Chargers came to RFK Stadium with Joe Gibbs as the offensive coordinator. And I believe the Redskins won 40-16. Now, anybody who was in that stadium that day and had any sense that Joe Gibbs was the offensive coordinator of the Chargers had to walk out of there thinking, how about that? And then when you find out that Gibbs is hired, it's like, really? I mean, George Allen was available again, and believe me, his name was thrown around. That was a possibility to come here. There was even talk they were going to try and get John Madden out of retirement. There was all kinds of things swirling around there. Nobody was saying, oh, wow, they got the hot coordinator. See, now the thinking has changed, and that's why nobody who was even a diehard football fan a year and a half ago could identify Ben Johnson as this hot guy. Most people, you say Ben Johnson, that's the guy who got caught with steroids in the Olympics, at least older people. So, now you go, oh, God, he got away. Oh, Mike McDonald, he's the young coordinator for the Ravens, and look at how good their defense is. Got away. Oh, we got a guy who's an experienced head coach who's taken a team to a Super Bowl? Who wants that? So, you just don't know in these circumstances. And, maybe Bill Belichick is the ultimate example of this. I was covering the Giants when he was the defensive coordinator under Bill Parcells, and Parcells didn't really let his assistants talk, so I really had no real sense of him. Then he goes to Cleveland, and he wasn't necessarily doing his full mumble news conference like he does now, but he was not highly thought of as a head coach. And when he got fired, people said, oh, good, he's not bringing that mess to Baltimore. And they got Ted Marchibroda. He's an experienced coach. He's coached in Baltimore before. He didn't get it done. Brian Billick comes in. Now that starts the era of the hot coordinator, because Billick had come from the Minnesota Vikings, who had set the record. They'd broken the Redskins record for most points scored. So, okay, that guy's coming in, and he had a great, great defense. Funny, he was an offensive guy, but he had Marvin Lewis as his defensive coordinator and Ray Lewis as his kingpin, and that team won in spite of its offense. You remember Tony Banks started the year as the quarterback, and they went through 5 games without scoring a touchdown, and I think they won 3 of them. And then Trent Dilfer took over, and Trent Dilfer, if he goes to the Hall of Fame, it's going to be on a bus, and he was good enough. And so you just don't know what this team is going to look like once they become good. And under this coach, while he may be a good coach, he's got to have a roster to work with, and this roster needs a major rebuild. What happened over the last 4 years was a product of a guy who was in over his head. Ron Rivera was not a good CEO, biting off much more than he could chew. along with the other issues that surfaced while he became the head coach, with the Washington Post writing about the sexual harassment in the organization, Dan Snyder going in front of Congress, the name change, the COVID, the cancer for Rivera, all those things added up. And here we are 4 years later, and you got a roster that's just not very good. They just aren't very good players. You can rebuild. You got a lot of high draft picks, and you got the number 2 pick of the draft, and you hopefully will get your franchise quarterback there. Though, and this is an interesting rumor that I saw this morning on Twitter, that Caleb Williams has let it be known to the Bears that he doesn't want to be drafted by them, and he's reportedly interested in 2 teams, the Raiders and the Commanders. And you might say, "Oh, good. That's this generational quarterback." I would really be nervous about Caleb Williams coming here. Yes, he won the Heisman Trophy. Yes, all the experts are saying this is a generation. This is Patrick Mahomes, the modern Patrick Mahomes. But the father, and this has been rumored as well, that the father has put out word that whoever drafts him, they're going to have a piece of the team. Well, you can't do that. That's not going to happen. And I just look at the father involvement and what a disaster it was with RG3, with the dad doing an interview with Channel 7 and saying, "Show me a running quarterback and I'll show you a loser." Well, welcome to the NFL in 2024, RG3-2 or RG2, because that's all that the successful quarterbacks do. They run. You got to be able to do that. And also the tragedy of Dwayne Haskins, where after he was drafted, there was a company formed called Haskins and Haskins with the dad, and they charged people to go to a draft night party at a bowling alley and strong-arm their way to number 7, which had been out of circulation for Joe Theismann. I mean, all those things were not good in his development, and who knows, he tragically died in an accident. But, had he stayed and gotten some maturity off of the bottoming out here and maybe working with Mike Tomlin in Pittsburgh, it might have turned around. But it was never going to work here. And the 2 things I think that went against him was, A, local, guy went to Bullis here, and the dad involvement. 2, now you got Caleb Williams, local, went to Gonzaga, dad involvement. And whether these things are true or not, we're not hearing any pushback like, "Oh, no, he's fine going with the Bears." I mean, it would seem that you would want to be the number 1 pick of the draft. That's where, even though there's a cap on how much you can make as a rookie, that's where you make the most money, and there is some prestige in going number one. Now, I imagine that the Bears would trade the pick if they're not going to take him. They're not just going to pass on him because he's in demand. But I'm not so sure I want him here. One other follow-up here, and that's on the offensive coordinator. I'm not real keen on Chip Kelly. This is reported now that Kelly is interested in getting back in the NFL. He's been .500 at UCLA. Did get the Eagles to a division title, but he's coached 1 more year in San Francisco. Went 2-14. So his last go round in the NFL was not good. Would he be a good offensive coordinator? I don't know. But that's going to be key in whatever they do is who's going to run the offense with Quinn running the defense. This was yesterday on ESPN, Dan Orlovsky with his look at that situation.
Yeah, I still think you're looking for the best leader. And we have fallen in love a little bit in the NFL for the great X's and O's people. If we look at the history of the playoffs, offensive coaches are the ones that are going to the Super Bowl. That's just the truth. But I think what we're starting to see is the cycle of defenses being more prevalent and more important than they were 6-7 years ago. Scoring, we've talked about that on this show. So I think it's the leader. But what happens is when you hire a defensive-minded head coach in modern-day football, you better be bringing a fantastic offensive coordinator, offensive-minded person with you. And Dan Quinn, that's going to be like the number 1, I guess, step that he's going to have to take is who's going to be that offensive-minded person to make sure not only the young quarterback, but to usher in an offensive part of that game that is going to be equivalent to a Super Bowl contender.
Yeah, and that's, like the record is with and without Kyle Shanahan, very different. And Barry Zerluga had that in his story at the Post today. He said, Dan Quinn's record, this is as a head coach in Atlanta, including the playoffs with Kyle Shanahan as his offensive coordinator, 21-14. his record, including the playoffs, without Shanahan calling the plays, 25-30. 21-14 with, 25-30 without. So finding the next guy is going to be key here. And who that guy is, we don't know. Is it going to be Chip Kelly? From a layman's view, I'm not keen on that. I don't even understand it because Kelly runs this high-paced, no-huddle offense. Defensive coaches, they want the air coming out of the ball, and they want to be able to rest their defense and shorten the game. I don't see how that would be a good marriage, but that's why I'm yakking behind a microphone and not standing on the sidelines with a headset. Got a different kind of headset on. Anyway, that wraps it for me. Mike Callow, I understand, is stuck on an elevator at the Metro, so I may be running over a little bit into the 11 o'clock hour. But if not, if Mike makes it out of the elevator, he'll be on at 11. If not, you'll get a little bit more of me. Stay with us. It's the ESPN 630 radio station, hopefully turning over to Mike Callow next.